It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world feels softer than usual, and the air seems to hold a kind of calm you do not often notice. I was sitting alone in my room, thinking about everything that had happened, when a single thought came to my mind. I trusted him more than anyone. And I never imagined that trust could break so quietly. Friends, before we dive into this story, I want to ask for a small favor. If what you hear resonates with your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how vast our community is. Happy listening. Trust is a strange thing. It does not arrive all at once. It grows in small pieces, like gentle steps forward, or tiny threads slowly weaving themselves into your life. And once you give it to someone, you don't expect to take it back. You don't expect it to be questioned. You don't expect it to hurt. For a long time, I believed I knew him better than anyone else did. I believed his words, his smiles, his promises. I believed in the version of him that he showed me, the version that felt safe, kind, patient, and steady. I believed he was someone I could fall back on when life became heavy. Someone who would listen when the world felt too loud. Someone whose presence could calm the chaos in my own heart. And for a long time, I never doubted him. Not once. Looking back now, I sometimes ask myself whether I missed the signs, or whether there were no signs at all. Maybe that is what makes this story hard to tell. The truth did not arrive like a storm. It did not shout. It did not break down the door. It came softly, almost gently, the way dusk replaces daylight, until you suddenly realize the world has become dark. There were small moments that only make sense now. Moments I brushed aside. Moments I told myself not to overthink. Moments when something inside me felt a faint whisper of discomfort, but I silenced it because I wanted to believe the best in him. I remember one evening when we were sitting outside, on the steps in front of my house. The sky was turning a soft orange, and everything felt peaceful. He looked at me in a way that felt almost serious, and he said, "You know you can trust me, right?" At the time, I smiled without hesitation. I said, "Of course," because believing in him felt natural. I did not ask myself why he needed to say that. I did not notice the flicker in his eyes before he looked away. I did not feel the small shift in the air. If I could go back to that moment, I might sit with it a little longer. I might listen to that faint inner voice I ignored. I might ask myself why trust needed to be reminded instead of simply lived. But the truth is, I cannot go back. None of us can. And maybe that is why stories like this matter, not because they change the past, but because they help us understand ourselves in a deeper, more honest way. They teach us how fragile trust can be, and how quietly truths can hide behind gentle smiles. The day everything changed was not loud. It did not begin with an argument or a dramatic moment. It began with something small, a detail that did not match the story I had known, a small inconsistency that felt out of place, like a missing piece of a puzzle you suddenly notice. At first, I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself that people make mistakes, that I should not assume the worst. But it stayed in my mind. It lingered in the corners of my thoughts, resurfacing whenever I tried to ignore it. And slowly, piece by piece, more small details began to appear. Little things. Quiet things. Things I would have ignored months earlier. And then, the truth revealed itself, not all at once, but slowly, in layers I had never expected to peel back. When I finally understood who he really was, it did not break me in the way I thought heartbreak would feel. It was softer, heavier, and quieter, like a candle being blown out in a dark room, leaving behind a kind of emptiness you see but cannot easily describe. This is the beginning of that story. A story of trust, discovery, loss, understanding, and eventually, healing. A story of seeing someone clearly for the first time, even after knowing them for years. A story that taught me that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones wearing the softest masks. Before everything changed, life felt simple in a way I did not fully appreciate at the time. Back then, my days moved with a quiet rhythm, the kind of rhythm you only understand when you look back and realize how peaceful things once were. My world was small but steady. I had my family, my routine, my little circle of comfort, and within that circle, he was becoming a central piece. I first met him during a time when I was not looking for anything new. Not a new friend. Not a new bond. Not a new chapter. But life has a gentle way of bringing people to you when you are least prepared, and that was how he stepped into my world. He was kind from the beginning. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in simple gestures that felt natural. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed things without making them obvious. He had a calm presence, the kind that made you feel like everything would be all right, even when you didn't know you needed reassurance. Our first real conversation happened on a rainy afternoon. I was sitting alone in a small cafe near my house, trying to finish some work while the sound of rain filled the space around me. He walked in, searching for a place to sit, and the only empty chair was across from mine. He approached with a small, polite smile and said, "Is this seat taken?" I shook my head. That simple moment, one chair, one question, became the start of a connection I never saw coming. We talked briefly that day, nothing deep, nothing too personal. Just small talk about the weather, the city, the books on the cafe shelf. But there was something in the way he spoke that made me feel comfortable, as if we had known each other longer than we actually had. Over the following weeks, we crossed paths more often. Sometimes by coincidence. Sometimes because we quietly hoped to. It began with friendly conversations, shared smiles, and small stories about our days. And slowly, without realizing it, I found myself looking forward to those moments far more than I intended to. At home, life was calm but busy. My family was close-knit, though everyone had their own responsibilities. My mother was gentle, someone who cared more through actions than words. My father was quiet, a man of few sentences but steady love. And I was somewhere in the middle, trying to grow, trying to understand life, trying to find my place in the world. When he came into my life, I welcomed him naturally, as if there was already a space carved out for him. He blended into my days smoothly, almost too smoothly. He learned about my routines, my habits, my small preferences, the kind of details people usually take time to notice. He remembered that I liked tea more than coffee, that I preferred quiet places over crowded ones, that I talked too much when I was nervous, that I fell silent when something bothered me. In return, he shared pieces of his own life too, though always in a gentle, controlled way. He told me about his work, the long hours, the pressure, the things that tired him. He mentioned his family only lightly, never too deep, always surface level. He talked about dreams he once had, some he still held on to, some he had quietly let go of. At the time, I didn't think much about what he didn't say. I trusted the version of himself he presented. I thought silence simply meant he was private, reserved, and calm. It did not occur to me that silence can also hide truths, or that carefulness can sometimes be a choice rather than a trait. Everyone around us noticed that he brought a certain warmth into my life. My mother once said, "You look lighter these days." And she was right. I did feel lighter, as if someone had taken a small part of my burdens and held them for me. Looking back, I think this is where the foundation of trust began. Not in a dramatic moment, but in the quiet comfort of being understood. In the steady presence of someone who seemed to care. In the softness he added to my days. If someone had told me then that the same person who brought peace into my life would one day become the source of my deepest confusion, I would not have believed them. Not even for a second. But this is how life works sometimes. The people who feel the safest are often the ones we never guard ourselves against. And that is how the story truly began. Not with excitement, not with suspicion, but with an innocent trust that grew without warning. As weeks turned into months, our connection deepened in a natural, unforced way. There was no clear moment where friendship turned into something stronger. It simply happened, like a slow sunrise that brightens the sky little by little until suddenly the whole world is filled with light. We shared many quiet moments, the kind that feel small at the time but become precious memories later. Sometimes we would walk along the old street near my house, talking about random things, childhood memories, small dreams, favorite songs. Other times we would sit on a bench in the park, watching people pass by as we talked about life in a soft, reflective way. One evening, as the sky was turning a gentle purple, he looked at me and said, "You make everything feel calmer." It was such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me. At that time, I took it as something sweet, something warm. I had no idea how much weight those words would carry in the future. My family began noticing how often he appeared in my stories. Whenever I talked about my day, his name seemed to be part of it, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in bigger ones. My mother listened with a soft smile. My father, quietly observant as always, simply nodded whenever his name came up, as if silently approving. There was one moment that stands out clearly from those early months. I came home one afternoon feeling exhausted from a long day, and before I could even set my bag down, he called me. His voice was calm, almost gentle, and he said, "You sound tired. Are you okay?" I had not said a word about how I felt. He simply knew, just from the way I answered the phone. At that time, it felt comforting, like being seen without having to explain yourself. I didn't know that later, those same moments of him knowing more than I expected would begin to feel unsettling, like pieces of a larger picture I had not yet understood. But in the early days, everything felt honest and genuine. We shared stories with each other, talked about our families, our fears, our tiny hopes. He told me about the pressure he felt at work, how he often carried responsibilities that tired him. Whenever he spoke about stress, he did so in a way that made me want to be a safe place for him. I wanted him to feel understood, just as he made me feel. There were days when he opened up more than usual. Once he said quietly, "It feels good to talk to someone without pretending." I remember wanting to reassure him, wanting to be someone he could rely on. I didn't realize then that I was giving him a level of trust that I had never given anyone before. My friends noticed the change in me too. One of them joked, "You smile more now." "Who is he?" I laughed it off, but she wasn't wrong. I did smile more. I did feel lighter. And I did feel safe. Back then, I believed that safety was real. I believed it was built on honesty. I believed it was mutual. Whenever we planned to meet, he never kept me waiting too long. He always arrived on time, always with a gentle expression that made me feel like I mattered in his world. He knew small details about my day, the ones most people forget. He remembered the date of an exam I was worried about. He remembered a story I once told him about my childhood. He remembered that I liked warm food on cold days and cold drinks on warm ones. It was easy to trust him. Too easy, maybe. He seemed like someone who had no reason to hide anything. Someone who stood steady, someone whose presence felt honest and uncomplicated. But life has a way of showing the truth slowly, like a curtain being pulled back little by little. At that time, I didn't notice any inconsistencies. Not a single one. Everything felt aligned: his words, his actions, and his calmness. It's strange how we often miss the earliest signs. We think we are observant. We think we understand people. But sometimes the heart chooses what it wants to believe, and the mind follows quietly behind. If someone had asked me during those months whether I trusted him, I would have said yes, without hesitation. Because back then, my world felt steady, and he felt like one of the safest parts of it. Looking back now, I realize how easily trust can form when you are offered warmth at the right moment. And how quietly it can blind you to things you are not prepared to see. As time went on, it felt natural to let him into more parts of my life. Not because I made a conscious decision, but because he blended into my days so smoothly that I barely noticed the transition. One moment, he was a new presence. And the next, he felt like someone who had always been there. Someone familiar. Someone steady. He started meeting my family more often, though always in a gentle, respectful way. He never forced conversations. He listened more than he spoke. My mother appreciated that. She once said, "He seems thoughtful," and I remember smiling quietly, feeling a small sense of pride, as if his goodness reflected something about me too. My father, who rarely expressed his emotions openly, gave a slight nod whenever he saw him. Not approval. Not disapproval. Just a quiet acceptance that felt comforting at the time. In those days, I didn't question anything. I believed that people showed who they were through their actions, and his actions seemed consistent. He checked in on me when I was overwhelmed. He encouraged me gently when I doubted myself. He listened patiently when I talked too much and noticed silently when I said too little. One small memory from that time still stays with me, a moment so simple, yet so warm. I had fallen sick with a mild fever, nothing serious, but enough to make me feel weak. Without asking, he came by with a small bag of groceries. Soup, medicine, and a few snacks he knew I liked. He placed the bag on the table and said softly, "I just want you to rest today." It was such a gentle moment, the kind that makes you feel cared for in a quiet, unspoken way. I didn't know then how deeply that moment would anchor my trust in him. In return, he shared pieces of his own life too, though always in a gentle, controlled way. He told me about his work, the long hours, the pressure, the things that tired him. He mentioned his family only lightly, never too deep, always surface level. He talked about dreams he once had, some he still held on to, some he had quietly let go of. At the time, I didn't think much about what he didn't say. I trusted the version of himself he presented. I thought silence simply meant he was private, reserved, and calm. It did not occur to me that silence can also hide truths, or that carefulness can sometimes be a choice rather than a trait. Everyone around us noticed that he brought a certain warmth into my life. My mother once said, "You look lighter these days." And she was right. I did feel lighter, as if someone had taken a small part of my burdens and held them for me. Looking back, I think this is where the foundation of trust began. Not in a dramatic moment, but in the quiet comfort of being understood. In the steady presence of someone who seemed to care. In the softness he added to my days. If someone had told me then that the same person who brought peace into my life would one day become the source of my deepest confusion, I would not have believed them. Not even for a second. But this is how life works sometimes. The people who feel the safest are often the ones we never guard ourselves against. And that is how the story truly began. Not with excitement, not with suspicion, but with an innocent trust that grew without warning. As weeks turned into months, our connection deepened in a natural, unforced way. There was no clear moment where friendship turned into something stronger. It simply happened, like a slow sunrise that brightens the sky little by little until suddenly the whole world is filled with light. We shared many quiet moments, the kind that feel small at the time but become precious memories later. Sometimes we would walk along the old street near my house, talking about random things, childhood memories, small dreams, favorite songs. Other times we would sit on a bench in the park, watching people pass by as we talked about life in a soft, reflective way. One evening, as the sky was turning a gentle purple, he looked at me and said, "You make everything feel calmer." It was such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me. At that time, I took it as something sweet, something warm. I had no idea how much weight those words would carry in the future. My family began noticing how often he appeared in my stories. Whenever I talked about my day, his name seemed to be part of it, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in bigger ones. My mother listened with a soft smile. My father, quietly observant as always, simply nodded whenever his name came up, as if silently approving. There was one moment that stands out clearly from those early months. I came home one afternoon feeling exhausted from a long day, and before I could even set my bag down, he called me. His voice was calm, almost gentle, and he said, "You sound tired. Are you okay?" I had not said a word about how I felt. He simply knew, just from the way I answered the phone. At that time, it felt comforting, like being seen without having to explain yourself. I didn't know that later, those same moments of him knowing more than I expected would begin to feel unsettling, like pieces of a larger picture I had not yet understood. But in the early days, everything felt honest and genuine. We shared stories with each other, talked about our families, our fears, our tiny hopes. He told me about the pressure he felt at work, how he often carried responsibilities that tired him. Whenever he spoke about stress, he did so in a way that made me want to be a safe place for him. I wanted him to feel understood, just as he made me feel. There were days when he opened up more than usual. Once he said quietly, "It feels good to talk to someone without pretending." I remember wanting to reassure him, wanting to be someone he could rely on. I didn't realize then that I was giving him a level of trust that I had never given anyone before. My friends noticed the change in me too. One of them joked, "You smile more now." "Who is he?" I laughed it off, but she wasn't wrong. I did smile more. I did feel lighter. And I did feel safe. Back then, I believed that safety was real. I believed it was built on honesty. I believed it was mutual. Whenever we planned to meet, he never kept me waiting too long. He always arrived on time, always with a gentle expression that made me feel like I mattered in his world. He knew small details about my day, the ones most people forget. He remembered the date of an exam I was worried about. He remembered a story I once told him about my childhood. He remembered that I liked warm food on cold days and cold drinks on warm ones. It was easy to trust him. Too easy, maybe. He seemed like someone who had no reason to hide anything. Someone who stood steady, someone whose presence felt honest and uncomplicated. But life has a way of showing the truth slowly, like a curtain being pulled back little by little. At that time, I didn't notice any inconsistencies. Not a single one. Everything felt aligned: his words, his actions, and his calmness. It's strange how we often miss the earliest signs. We think we are observant. We think we understand people. But sometimes the heart chooses what it wants to believe, and the mind follows quietly behind. If someone had asked me during those months whether I trusted him, I would have said yes, without hesitation. Because back then, my world felt steady, and he felt like one of the safest parts of it. Looking back now, I realize how easily trust can form when you are offered warmth at the right moment. And how quietly it can blind you to things you are not prepared to see. As time went on, it felt natural to let him into more parts of my life. Not because I made a conscious decision, but because he blended into my days so smoothly that I barely noticed the transition. One moment, he was a new presence. And the next, he felt like someone who had always been there. Someone familiar. Someone steady. He started meeting my family more often, though always in a gentle, respectful way. He never forced conversations. He listened more than he spoke. My mother appreciated that. She once said, "He seems thoughtful," and I remember smiling quietly, feeling a small sense of pride, as if his goodness reflected something about me too. My father, who rarely expressed his emotions openly, gave a slight nod whenever he saw him. Not approval. Not disapproval. Just a quiet acceptance that felt comforting at the time. In those days, I didn't question anything. I believed that people showed who they were through their actions, and his actions seemed consistent. He checked in on me when I was overwhelmed. He encouraged me gently when I doubted myself. He listened patiently when I talked too much and noticed silently when I said too little. One small memory from that time still stays with me: a moment so simple, yet so warm. I had fallen sick with a mild fever, nothing serious, but enough to make me feel weak. Without asking, he came by with a small bag of groceries. Soup, medicine, and a few snacks he knew I liked. He placed the bag on the table and said softly, "I just want you to rest today." It was such a gentle moment, the kind that makes you feel cared for in a quiet, unspoken way. I didn't know then how deeply that moment would anchor my trust in him. I froze. Because the truth was no, nothing was okay. Not the tension. Not the silence. Not what happened. Not what was still happening inside me. I opened my mouth to say yes, like I always did. But instead, my voice cracked. A small, broken whisper escaped. "Not really." Dad finally looked up. Mom stopped the running water. And suddenly, the whole house felt too quiet. I didn't cry at first. I just stood there, staring at the floor, hands shaking without permission. The words felt stuck in my throat, like they were made of stone. "What's wrong?" Mom asked, stepping closer. I tried to speak, but the moment I lifted my head and saw their faces concerned, confused, tired, everything inside me collapsed. The tears I had been holding back for days rushed forward all at once. I felt them before I even realized I was crying. "It's just too much," I whispered. "I don't know what to do anymore." Mom reached out, but I stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by everything I'd been feeling: fear, hurt, anger, exhaustion. Dad stood up slowly, like he wasn't sure whether to comfort me or give me space. And I couldn't blame him. I didn't know what I needed either. For a moment, none of us spoke. Just three people standing in the middle of a storm we all pretended wasn't happening. And then, finally, I said the words I'd been afraid to admit. "I feel like I'm breaking." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Because that was the moment everything changed. The moment they realized this wasn't just a small problem or a misunderstanding. Something deeper was hurting me. Something they couldn't ignore anymore. And from that moment, there was no going back. The next morning felt different. Not lighter. Not better. Just different. I woke up with that heavy feeling behind my eyes, the one you get after crying harder than you meant to. My room was dim, soft sunlight slipping through the curtains, and for a moment I just lay there, replaying everything from the night before. The way my voice cracked. The way Mom froze. The way Dad finally put his phone down. The way all those buried feelings spilled out without warning. I wasn't embarrassed. But I was scared. Scared of what would happen next. Would things go back to the way they were? Would they pretend nothing happened? Would they blame themselves? Would they blame me? I didn't know. But the house felt strangely quiet when I finally stepped out of my room. Not the tense quiet from before. This was a careful quiet, like everyone was trying not to break anything else. Mom was sitting at the dining table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. She looked up the moment she heard me. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. Her voice didn't sound normal. It sounded fragile, like she'd spent the whole night thinking. Dad was in the living room, pacing slowly, pretending to read a newspaper. He kept glancing toward the hallway, almost like he was waiting for me to appear. When he finally saw me, he tried to smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to tell me he was trying. "We were going to check on you," he said. "But we didn't want to wake you." I nodded, not sure what to say. Every part of me felt exposed, like they could see all the cracks I'd been hiding. Mom pulled out the chair beside her. "Sit with us, please." And for the first time in days, I didn't hesitate. I sat down. No one spoke right away. Mom pushed the untouched tea toward me. Dad sat across the table, elbows resting on the wood, eyes full of worry he didn't know how to express. Finally, Mom said quietly, "We didn't realize you were hurting that much." Dad added, "We should have seen it. I'm sorry." The apology hit harder than I expected. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first step towards something we hadn't had in a long time. Honesty. I took a shaky breath and looked at them both. And in that moment, something shifted between us. Not fully healed. Not suddenly perfect. But open. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or emotional. It was this. A quiet morning, three tired people sitting at a table, finally willing to talk. And even though I didn't know where the conversation would lead, for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could change. We sat at the table for a long moment, letting the silence settle around us, not heavy this time, but gentle, like we were all trying to let our hearts catch up with our words. Dad was the first to speak again. "You said last night that you felt alone," he said carefully, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Can you tell us what you meant?" I looked down at my hands. They were trembling a little. I had spent so long swallowing my feelings that saying them out loud felt like trying to lift something much heavier than my own strength. But I knew I had to speak now. I had opened the door last night, and this was the moment I had to step through it. So I took a slow breath and said softly, I didn't feel like I had anyone I could trust completely. Mom flinched, but not out of anger, out of pain. Dad's eyebrows drew together, and he leaned forward slightly. I continued before I lost the courage. I kept everything inside because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to make anyone worry. And I thought if I shared what I was feeling, you'd think I was being dramatic or ungrateful. Mom's voice cracked. We would never think that. I know, I whispered. But sometimes the fear becomes louder than the truth. Dad sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead, as if realizing how many things he had missed. Then he asked gently, Is it about him? My heart stopped for a second. Him. The person I had trusted more than anyone. The person whose name we hadn't spoken out loud in weeks. The person who had slowly become the center of everything. And then the source of my deepest hurt. I nodded, barely. Mom reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant to fix anything. It was simply her way of saying, You're safe. You can talk. And something inside me loosened. I thought I knew who he was, I said, voice shaking. I believed everything he told me. Every promise. Every gentle word. I trusted him more than anyone. Mom squeezed my hand, silently encouraging me to go on. But then, I whispered, I learned who he really was. And it broke something inside me that I didn't know could break. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them rushed me. They just listened fully, completely, without judgment. And that made the next words easier to say. He wasn't who he showed me. He wasn't honest. And when I realized that, it felt like the ground under me disappeared. Like I couldn't trust myself anymore. Because I didn't see it coming. Dad's eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in months. He didn't interrupt me. He didn't ask for details. He just let me speak at my own pace. And after that, I continued, I didn't know how to talk to anyone. I didn't know how to ask for help. I was scared if I told you, everything would change. Dad swallowed hard. Mom's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. You should never have felt that alone, Dad whispered. I know, I murmured. But I did. For a moment, all three of us sat there, letting the truth settle. Not to hurt anyone. Not to blame anyone. Just to finally let it exist out in the open. And the moment it did, I felt something inside me begin to breathe again. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was the first real step toward understanding. For me. And for them. The air in the room felt still, as if the house itself was listening. Mom's hand was still resting on mine, steady and warm. Dad sat quietly across the table, eyes soft but serious, like he was finally seeing everything he had missed. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to hide anything. Dad cleared his throat gently. His voice was calm, careful. Can you tell us, what exactly made you lose trust in him? It wasn't pressure. It wasn't an interrogation. It was an invitation. A chance to speak the truth I had buried deep inside me. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to tell them, but because saying it out loud made it real again. The memories felt close, like shadows just waiting to be acknowledged. I started noticing small things. I began slowly. Little lies. Things he said that didn't match his actions. Messages he hid. Promises he broke without explanation. Mom's eyes softened in understanding, the way only a mother's eyes can. But I kept telling myself I was overthinking, I said quietly. I kept giving him excuses. I kept believing his words because I didn't want to lose him. Dad leaned back a little, absorbing every word. And then? He asked softly. I drew in a shaky breath. And then one day, the truth came out. Not through him. Not because he was honest. But because someone else told me. Mom's fingers tightened around mine. Dad's jaw tensed, but not in anger. In protectiveness. What truth? Dad asked, voice barely above a whisper. I looked down at the table. For a moment, I watched the pattern in the wood, letting the silence hold me. Then I finally said the words I had been carrying alone. He was not the person he pretended to be. He was speaking to someone else. Someone he never mentioned. He hid it. He lied about it. And when I found out, it felt like everything inside me collapsed. Mom let out a slow, heartbroken breath. Dad ran a hand across his face, as if trying to calm the ache he felt for me. He told me it was nothing, I continued. He said I was imagining things. He made me feel like I was the one who didn't trust enough. Like I was the problem. And for days, I believed him. Saying that out loud hurt more than I expected. That's why I didn't talk to you, I whispered. Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I trusted him so much. Ashamed that I didn't see who he really was. Ashamed that I let him make me doubt myself. Mom shook her head gently, tears slipping down her cheeks. You have nothing to be ashamed of, she said, voice trembling but steady. Nothing. Dad whispered. People who lie are responsible for their actions. Not the people they deceive. Something inside me loosened, like a knot that had been pulled too tight finally giving way. And for the first time, I felt understood. Truly understood. Dad leaned forward, voice soft but firm. I'm glad you told us, he said. I know it hurts. I know it feels like your whole world changed. But the truth, even when it breaks you, is the only thing that helps you stand again. Mom nodded through her tears. We're here now. We're not going anywhere. Their words didn't erase the pain. They didn't make everything suddenly easy. But they did something even more important. They made me feel less alone. And in that moment, with the morning light warming the table, with their voices steady and gentle, with the truth finally spoken, I realized something I hadn't seen before. This was the moment everything changed. Not because the hurt disappeared, but because I finally stopped carrying it alone. It was the turning point I never expected. Yet the one I needed more than anything. After the truth settled between us, the house grew quiet again. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence from before. This silence felt different. Safer. Like all three of us were finally breathing the same air after weeks of holding it in. Mom wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, trying to steady herself. Dad got up to refill everyone's cups, even though none of us had touched our first ones. It wasn't about tea. It was just his way of showing he cared. Small gestures, quiet support. When he sat back down, he took a slow breath. I want you to tell us everything, he said softly. Only if you feel ready. Not because we want details, but because we want to understand what you went through. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the father I grew up with. The one who used to kneel beside my bed when I was scared at night. The one who taught me how to ride a bike. The one who always made problems look a little less frightening just by standing beside me. So I nodded. And I began telling them the story I had kept locked inside me. It started slowly. I trusted him, because he made me feel seen, I said. Like he understood me in a way no one else did. They both listened without interrupting. He always knew the right things to say. The gentle words. The reassuring messages. And I believed every single one of them. Because he never gave me a reason to doubt him. Dad folded his hands together, watching me with a calm, steady expression. But then small signs started to show. He would disappear without explanation. He became protective of his phone. Sometimes he looked at me the way someone looks at a mirror, not at a person, but at something that reflects what they want to see. Mom inhaled softly, like she recognized that kind of behavior from somewhere in her own memories. I didn't ask questions at first, I continued. I didn't want to sound suspicious. I didn't want to lose him. So I stayed quiet. Mom whispered. Many people do the same. Silence becomes easier than fear. Her voice carried a hint of experience, a depth I had never noticed before. I went on. One day, a friend told me she saw him talking to someone. She said he looked very close to her. Like they weren't strangers. Like there was something there. The words came slowly but clearly. When I asked him about it, he laughed. He told me I was insecure. He said I was imagining things. And he made me apologize for even questioning him. Dad's eyes tightened. And you believed him? He asked gently. I did, I whispered. Because I wanted to. Because the idea of losing him felt worse than the idea of being wrong. Mom squeezed my hand again, not in pity, but in understanding. The hardest part, I said, was when I found out the truth not from him, but from someone else. Someone who didn't even know they were breaking my heart when they said it. Dad leaned back slowly, his expression full of quiet sorrow. He lied to you, he said. Yes. But it wasn't just the lie, I replied. It was the way he made me doubt myself. The way he made me feel like the problem. The way he kept me in the dark even when he knew I was hurting. Mom closed her eyes for a moment, her voice soft when she spoke again. That kind of hurt doesn't come from the lie alone. It comes from betrayal of trust. The room felt still, safe, honest. Dad looked at me with more gentleness than I had seen from him in a long time. You didn't deserve any of that, he said. Not the lies. Not the shame. Not the silence. And hearing those words from him, from the man who always believed in strength, broke something inside me that desperately needed breaking. I finally let myself feel everything. Not just the pain. Not just the betrayal. But also the relief. The relief of not hiding anymore. The relief of being heard. The relief of being understood. The relief of being believed. For the first time in weeks, my heart felt a little lighter, like it had been carrying too much weight for too long, and now someone else was finally helping me hold it. Mom spoke quietly. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who show us our deepest lesson. Not because they wanted to teach it, but because we needed to see the truth. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. And what truth is that? I asked. She looked at me softly, lovingly. That you are stronger than you think. And that losing someone who lies is not a loss. It's protection. Dad added. And you're not alone. Not anymore. For the first time that day, warmth spread through my chest. Not because everything was okay. Not because the pain was gone. But because I finally understood. This moment sitting at a table, speaking truths none of us wanted to say, was the turning point I had been searching for. A moment that didn't erase the past, but allowed me to breathe again. After our long conversation, Dad suggested we take a walk outside. Not far, just around the neighborhood, but far enough to feel a little distance from the heaviness we had just unpacked. The afternoon air was cool. A gentle breeze brushed against my skin. The sky had that soft, pale color that comes after a morning full of emotion. We walked slowly, all three of us. Not in a straight line. Not in perfect sync. Just together. For a while, none of us spoke. But it didn't feel awkward. It felt peaceful. Like silence had become another language we could finally share. Dad was the first to break it. When you care about someone, he said carefully, your heart becomes soft. Trust becomes natural. Belief becomes easy. And when that trust is broken, the softest part of you takes the hit. I listened quietly. That doesn't make you weak, he continued. It makes you human. Mom walked beside me, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression calm but thoughtful. I know how it feels, she said quietly. To believe someone completely, only to realize they were not who you thought they were. I turned toward her, surprised. She smiled gently, a small, sad smile that held years of memory. When I was younger, she said, I trusted someone too deeply. I thought he was kind. I thought he cared. And I learned painfully that I saw a version of him that did not exist. I had never heard her talk about this. Not once. It felt strange and comforting to realize she understood my pain not just as a mother, but as a person. What happened? I asked. She shrugged lightly. I learned. I grew. And I promised myself something very simple. If someone makes me question my worth, they are not worth my heart. Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Dad nodded in agreement. You're allowed to feel hurt, he said. You're allowed to be angry, or confused, or lost. But you are not allowed not ever to blame yourself for someone else's dishonesty. We kept walking, the sound of our footsteps blending with the soft rustle of leaves. I keep thinking I should have seen it earlier, I admitted quietly. That if I noticed the signs sooner, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. Dad shook his head. Hurt comes from trust, not timing. Mom added, and trust is not a mistake. We stopped near a small park, watching a few children run across the grass. Their laughter drifted through the air light, effortless, untouched by the weight adults carry. I miss feeling like that, I whispered. Light. You will feel that again, Mom said gently. But healing doesn't come by rushing it. It comes by understanding what broke, and giving yourself the time to rebuild. Her words were slow, calm, almost whispered. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. You think this is the end of something, he said. But it's the beginning. The beginning of seeing yourself clearly again. We stood there for a moment, the three of us, simply existing in the quiet afternoon. Then I said something I wasn't expecting. I'm scared to trust again. Mom's eyes softened. That fear is natural, she said. But one day, slowly, gently, someone will show you that trust can feel safe again. And you'll let them in. Not because you forget what happened, but because you grow bigger than the pain. Dad added, and until that day comes, you have us. A warmth spread through my chest again, gentle, steady, and healing. As we walked back home, I realized something important. The turning point wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small ones. Opening up. Being heard. Being understood. Being supported. Being reminded that I wasn't at fault. I realized that I didn't need to figure everything out today. I didn't need to erase the pain. I didn't need to pretend I was okay. I just needed to take one step at a time. And I wasn't walking alone. That quiet truth, that simple, steady comfort, became the moment I finally saw the situation clearly. I didn't lose the person I thought I knew. I lost an illusion. And in doing so, I found something real. Myself. My strength. My worth. My ability to heal. This was the turning point I never wanted, but the one I truly needed. Healing did not arrive all at once. It didn't rush into my life like a wave, washing everything clean. It came quietly, slowly, gently, almost like the sun rising after a long night, not sudden, not dramatic, just a soft glow that reminded me light still existed. The days after our long talk with my parents felt different. Not perfect. Not easy. But different in a way that felt honest. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding how I felt. I wasn't forcing myself to smile. I wasn't trying to convince myself that nothing had happened. Instead, I let myself feel things as they came. A little sadness in the morning. A small sense of relief in the afternoon. A quiet heaviness at night. And somehow, acknowledging those feelings made them easier to carry. Mom became more present, more observant. She would knock on my door before bed and ask if I needed anything. Not out of worry, out of care. Dad became softer in his own way. He didn't say much, but he made time for me, even on busy days. Sometimes he'd sit beside me in the living room without speaking, just watching a quiet show with me, letting his presence speak for him. Their efforts weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were simple, steady, human. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a while. Safety. One morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, looking out the window. Birds were perched on the branches of the tree outside, hopping gently from one twig to another. They moved without fear, as if they trusted the world beneath them. I envied that feeling, that soft, quiet trust. But for the first time I also believed that maybe, with time, I could feel something like it again. Mom knocked on my door softly and stepped in with a small smile. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I replied, my voice calm. She sat beside me on the bed and watched the birds through the window with me. "You seem lighter today," she observed. I shrugged a little. "Maybe. I don't know. It will come and go," she said gently. "That's how healing works. Some days feel heavy. Some feel easier. Neither is wrong." I nodded. Her words didn't fix everything, but they made breathing feel easier. She placed a small folded note on my lap. "What's this?" I asked. "Just something I wrote," she said. "Read it when you want." She didn't explain further. She simply kissed my forehead and left the room. I opened the paper slowly. Inside, in her soft handwriting, she had written, "Your heart is not broken. It is bruised. And bruises heal." The words were simple, but they touched something deep inside me. I folded the note and kept it in my drawer, knowing I'd read it many times in the days ahead. Later that afternoon, Dad walked into the living room with 2 cups of tea, one for him, one for me. He handed me my cup and sat down. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "You know, I've made mistakes in my life too. Big ones. Ones I don't talk about often." I looked at him, surprised. He continued, his voice steady but soft. "But one thing I learned is this. Hurt changes people. It can make them close up, or it can make them open in ways they never expected." I stared into my cup, letting his words settle. "Which one do you think I'm becoming?" I asked. He smiled gently, not a big smile, just a quiet one. "I think you're opening," he said. Slowly. Carefully. "And that's the right thing to do." The right thing. Those words echoed in my chest. It didn't feel like I was doing much. Just waking up. Just breathing. Just walking through days that felt fragile. But maybe that was the healing. Maybe healing wasn't a dramatic transformation. Maybe it wasn't a sudden burst of strength. Maybe it was just choosing to keep moving, even when it felt difficult. That night, I sat by my window again. This time, the stars were visible, tiny points of light scattered across the dark sky. I whispered to myself, "It's okay. One day at a time." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a plan. It was simply an acceptance. A quiet step forward. And for the first time since everything happened, the night didn't feel so heavy. I spent the next morning feeling as if my chest carried a weight no one else could see. The house was quieter than usual, yet underneath that quietness, something kept trembling, like the calm before a thunderstorm. The tension from yesterday still lived inside the walls, inside my body, inside every breath I took. I woke up early, long before the sun, because sleep wouldn't hold me anymore. My mind had been looping the same questions through the night. Why did everything feel like it was slipping out of my hands? Why did I keep running from owning my truth, when the consequences of that silence were becoming unbearable? By the time everyone else woke, I had already made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen twice, and walked in circles around the living room, trying to convince myself I still had control. But control was the very thing I had lost long ago. I just hadn't admitted it. Around mid-morning, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway, slow, dragging, and familiar. I didn't even need to turn around. I knew it was her. My sister. The one who had unintentionally pushed me into confronting a truth I had tried to bury. The one who looked now as if she carried her own version of the truth. Something heavy, something raw. She entered the kitchen quietly. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with exhaustion that came from crying. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cold. She just looked wounded. And that hurt me more than any shouting ever could. "Can we talk?" she asked in a voice so soft it almost felt like she was borrowing it. I nodded, even though a part of me wanted to run. We sat at the table across from each other, two people who had once shared everything but were suddenly separated by fears neither of us had the courage to name. She stared at her hands for a long moment before finally lifting her head. "I didn't mean to upset you yesterday," she said. "But you shutting down like that. It scared me. Because I know you. And that wasn't you." Her words pierced straight into me. I swallowed hard. "I didn't shut down," I said quietly. "I just didn't know how to respond." "That's the thing," she whispered. "You never respond when it matters. You hide, you push things away, you pretend you're fine. And I don't know how to help you if you keep doing that." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I noticed how tired she was from trying to carry both her pain and mine. She had been watching me fall apart piece by piece, and she had been trying to catch me, even though she wasn't strong enough to hold everything on her own. "I'm trying," I said, though my voice trembled. "I just don't know how to explain what's happening inside me." Silence stretched out again. But this time it wasn't cold. It was waiting. She reached across the table, her hand trembling with hesitation, and placed it over mine. The contact was small, but it grounded me in a way nothing else had. "Whatever it is," she said, "you don't have to carry it alone." Those words were a mirror. They showed me the truth. The real problem wasn't the conflict, the misunderstandings, or the fear of disappointing someone. It was the loneliness I had built around myself like a fortress. A loneliness no one had forced on me. I had chosen it because it felt safer than facing what lived underneath. I took a deep breath. She kept waiting. I kept hesitating. And that's when the moment snapped. Not loud. Not dramatic. But in a quiet, shattering way, like glass falling off a shelf and splitting on the floor in slow motion. "I'm tired," I finally whispered. "I'm so tired of pretending everything is fine. I'm tired of feeling like I'm falling apart when I'm supposed to be the one holding things together." My sister's eyes softened with immediate understanding. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react dramatically. She simply listened, something no one had done in a very long time. "I feel like I'm losing myself," I continued. "Like I don't recognize who I am anymore. And I don't know how to fix it." The confession came out haltingly, uneven, but once it started, I couldn't stop. The words rushed through me as though they had been locked inside for years. "I feel like I can't talk about my fear because everyone expects me to be strong. And I don't want to break anyone's expectations. But it's breaking me." She blinked, but not out of shock, out of sorrow. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "I always thought you trusted me more than anyone." "I do," I said softly. But I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Because once you say something, it becomes real. My sister sat back, absorbing that. The air grew heavier, sinking around us like humidity before rainfall. Then she said something that changed the direction of everything. "You don't have to be the strong one all the time. You're allowed to fall apart too." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying how deeply she meant it. Those words felt almost foreign to me. No one had told me that before, not in a way that I believed. And that was when the second breaking point came. Not mine. Hers. Tears filled her eyes, not because of her problems, but because of mine. She had been carrying the burden of watching me struggle silently, and it had broken her in ways I never noticed. "I hate that you've been hurting and I didn't know how bad it was," she cried. "I hate that I made it worse yesterday. I thought I was helping. I didn't know I was pushing you towards something you weren't ready for." I felt something inside me collapse, not in a destructive way, but like a wall finally giving up after holding too much weight for too long. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry for shutting you out. I just didn't want to be a disappointment." She shook her head firmly, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You could never disappoint me. Not with honesty." Never. Her words landed with full force. Because honesty was the thing I had avoided. Honesty was the thing that would eventually lead to the revelation, the truth neither of us fully understood yet, but both of us were inching toward. For a moment, we both breathed deeply, letting the heaviness settle and shift. Something unspoken hung between us, growing, waiting. She squeezed my hand. "Can you promise me something?" she asked. "What?" "That whenever you're ready, when the moment comes, you'll tell me everything. Whatever it is." I nodded. "I will. I promise." But making that promise didn't make it easier. It only made the stakes higher. Because now the truth mattered. Because now someone was waiting for it. And part 5 was not over. Not even close. A deeper breaking point was still coming, one that would shake everything, including my promise, my fear, and the fragile progress we had just made. And when it arrived, nothing would be the same. That night felt strangely quiet, too quiet compared to everything I had been carrying inside me. When I went back to my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for what felt like minutes, maybe hours. My mind kept replaying everything. The argument, the voices, the apology, the hesitation, the small, trembling attempt at understanding. It was overwhelming. But it was also the first time in a long time that the silence didn't feel like punishment. I leaned back against the pillow and exhaled deeply, the kind of breath that comes from a place you rarely touch, somewhere beneath all the fear and all the exhaustion. My body finally felt lighter, even if just a little. And sometimes, a little is enough to keep you going. I heard footsteps outside. Slow. Careful. Almost afraid to disturb the peace that had finally settled. A soft knock followed. I knew it was her. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to, but I needed a moment. Eventually, without looking up, I whispered, "Come in." The door opened gently. She stepped inside, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, her presence didn't feel like a storm entering the room. She closed the door slowly and stood near it, unsure of how close she was allowed to be. Her voice came out small, almost like a child asking for permission. Can I sit?" I nodded. She walked toward me, stopping at the foot of the bed as if she was measuring each step, scared she might cross a line without realizing. She sat carefully, hands folded, eyes lowered. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something so soft, so unexpected, that it made my chest tighten. "I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try." Those words broke something inside me, not in a painful way, but in a way that made room for something new. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes had that same mixture of guilt and hope I'd seen earlier, but now there was something else too, vulnerability. Something she never showed, not even when she was hurting. She continued, "All my life, I've been taught to endure, to keep going, to never show weakness. But I forgot that strength doesn't mean silence. And I think I've passed that mistake on to you." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. Hearing an apology is one thing. Feeling the apology is another." And this time I felt it. A small part of me wanted to move closer, to take her hand, to tell her it wasn't too late. Another part of me wanted to hold back, to protect myself, to wait until I was sure. Confusion. Relief. Hesitation. Hope. All of it tangled together. After a long pause, I finally spoke. "I don't want us to keep hurting each other." She lifted her eyes, and there was a gentle shine in the more quiet gratefulness. "I don't either," she said. "Just tell me what you need. I'm ready to listen." I didn't have the perfect answer then. How could I? Healing doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't happen in one night or one conversation. But something inside me softened enough to reach for the simplest truth I had. "I just want honesty. And space. And a little patience." She nodded without hesitation. "You'll have it." For the first time in months, we sat together without tension thickening the air. It was strange, almost fragile, but real. I could feel a shift between us, the kind that doesn't fully fix things but starts the process. After a while, she stood up. "I'll let you rest," she said quietly. "But I'm here if you need me. Truly here." She walked to the door, paused, and then turned back. "And I'm proud of you. For speaking. For standing up for yourself. Even if it hurt me to hear it." My breath caught. She smiled small, sad, but genuine. Then she stepped out, leaving the door slightly open, like a silent promise that things wouldn't be shut between us again. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling. For the first time, my mind wasn't racing. My heartbeat wasn't pounding. My chest didn't feel like it was caving in. Instead, I felt warm. Not healed. Not perfect. But warm. Like something had begun. Like the night had chosen not to punish me, but to hold me. Like forgiveness, slow, delicate, unsteady, had finally taken its first breath. Healing, I learned, was never about rushing forward. It wasn't about forgetting what happened or pretending the past didn't hurt. It was about rebuilding, brick by brick, the trust one had lost, first in myself, then in the world around me. For weeks, I stayed close to my parents. Not just physically, but emotionally. I spoke about small things. The way I felt when I woke up, the little moments that made me smile, and the quiet sadness that returned unexpectedly in the evenings. And they listened. Always. No judgment. No lectures. Just listening. It felt strange at first. To talk about my feelings so openly. I had spent so long swallowing them, hiding them even from myself. Now I was naming them, giving them space. And somehow, naming them made them feel less heavy. I also started spending time alone, intentionally. Not because I wanted to be isolated, but because I needed to learn how to be with myself without fear. I would sit in the park, under the trees where the wind moved the leaves gently, and simply watch life go on. People walking by, children laughing, birds hopping along the grass. The world continued calm, steady, and unaware of my inner chaos, and I realized that I could continue too, slowly, steadily. One of the hardest lessons was learning to trust myself again. To listen to my instincts, to honor my own boundaries, to know that I could be strong even when I felt vulnerable. I wrote down my feelings in a journal, sometimes filling pages with words I hadn't spoken to anyone. Other times, I simply wrote single sentences. I am allowed to feel hurt. I am allowed to take my time. I am allowed to say no. Each line felt like a small step toward reclaiming myself. There were moments when the memories came back sharply. A message, a memory of his smile, the way he spoke to me when I trusted him completely. Those moments would sting, sometimes deeply. But instead of letting them control me, I began to acknowledge them. I would breathe slowly, let the pain pass through, and remind myself, this is not your fault. This is part of the journey. Gradually, I noticed changes. I laughed more freely, though softly. I smiled without forcing it. I felt lighter when I walked through familiar streets. I began noticing small joys again, the warmth of tea in my hands, the quiet scent of rain on the pavement, the comfort of my parents' presence without needing to speak. I also started reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the months of emotional chaos. Their laughter reminded me that trust could exist in small, gentle ways. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't share my deepest pain immediately. But slowly, layer by layer, I allowed myself to rely on people again. Not blindly. Not with reckless faith. But with a quiet, steady awareness. This is support. This is safety. And then, one evening, I found myself looking in the mirror, really looking. I saw someone who had been through a storm and survived. Not untouched. Not unscathed. But alive. Whole in ways I had forgotten I could be. And I realized that trust could return starting with myself. That night, I sat by the window, watching the stars. I whispered quietly, almost to no one, I can be okay. Slowly. One step at a time. It was a whisper, but it felt louder than all the chaos I had endured. Because it was true. I had learned to trust myself again. And for the first time, I felt like the future could be gentle, not because the past had disappeared, but because I had discovered the strength to carry it with me. As the days turned into weeks, I began noticing a subtle shift inside me. The tight knot of hurt that had lived in my chest for months started to loosen, not entirely, but enough to let something else in: understanding. Not understanding of him, never that, but understanding of myself. Understanding that I could survive betrayal and still remain whole. One afternoon, I sat with Mom in the living room, the sun streaming gently through the curtains. We didn't speak at first. We simply sat, letting the silence stretch comfortably between us. Then she said softly, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." Her words settled over me like a gentle rain. "I know," I whispered. "But it feels impossible to even imagine forgiving him." Mom nodded. "You don't have to forgive him for his sake. You forgive him for yourself. To release the weight he put on your heart. To stop carrying it when you don't need to." I thought about that for a long time. I realized she was right. Holding on to the anger, the disappointment, the betrayal, it didn't protect me. It didn't change what happened. It only kept me tied to the pain. So I began small. Not grand gestures, not declarations of forgiveness, just quiet acceptance. Accepting that he had hurt me. Accepting that I had trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Accepting that those months of confusion and heartbreak had changed me, but not broken me. Some days, I would sit quietly and whisper the words to myself. "I forgive you, not for you but for me." And each time I said it, the tightness in my chest loosened a little more. It didn't disappear entirely. Some nights, it would return, like an unwelcome visitor. But I learned to greet it calmly, to let it pass without letting it control me. I also started reflecting on my own growth. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise. I learned to trust my instincts. I learned to value myself even when someone else didn't. I learned that it's okay to be cautious, but it's never okay to stop believing in the goodness of others entirely. One evening, I found myself smiling at small, ordinary moments again. The neighbor's dog barking playfully. The way the wind shifted leaves in the trees. The scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby shop. And slowly, I realized something remarkable. Life could feel gentle again. Not because the past was erased, but because I had reclaimed my own heart. Dad noticed the change too. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He would sometimes glance at me with quiet pride, that small, subtle smile that said, "You're stronger than you know." And Mom would occasionally squeeze my hand when I least expected it, a silent acknowledgement that she saw me healing fully, patiently, without rush. Forgiveness became my own private strength. Not a grand act, not a dramatic release, but a quiet decision, to let go of the hold the past had on me. To acknowledge it, honor it, and then step forward. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instantaneous. But it was real. And that made all the difference. Because in forgiving not for him, not for anyone else, I learned the most important thing. I could survive. I could grow. I could trust myself again. And that realization was the true turning point of my healing journey. The months that followed felt like waking from a long, restless dream. The kind where you are aware of danger but can't move, where fear and hope exist in the same space. I was slowly learning to step out of that dream, into reality, into a life where I felt solid again, even if scars remained. I began noticing my own rhythms again. The mornings when sunlight filled the room, warming my face. The evenings when I could sit quietly, reading a book, or simply watching the city lights from the window. The comfort of knowing that my presence mattered to those around me, and more importantly, that it mattered to myself. I also started reconnecting with the small joys of life. I would take walks alone, letting the world move around me without rushing. I would laugh at something silly on TV, and not feel guilty for it. I would write letters in my journal, letters I never planned to send, telling my feelings the truths they deserved. Sometimes, Memories of him would drift back unexpectedly. A song on the radio. A familiar phrase. A fleeting thought. But I had learned to greet those memories without fear. I would acknowledge them, let the emotions pass through, and then release them quietly, like letting leaves float down a stream. The hardest lesson I learned during this time was that strength doesn't mean never feeling weak. It doesn't mean never crying. It doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. Strength means allowing yourself to feel deeply, to trust slowly, and to continue moving forward even when the past is heavy. Mom and Dad remained quietly by my side throughout this period. Their support was steady, unshakable, and gentle. They never asked for details I wasn't ready to share. They never forced advice I didn't want. They simply allowed me to find my way back to myself at my own pace. And in that space, I discovered the most important thing. My resilience. One afternoon, while sitting by the window with sunlight spilling across my hands, I realized I was smiling genuinely. Not out of distraction, not out of pretending, but out of true, quiet relief. I had reclaimed parts of myself I didn't know I had lost. I had reclaimed the ability to trust my instincts. I had reclaimed my own worth. I thought about him one last time, not with anger, not with longing, but with a soft acknowledgement. He had taught me painful lessons, yes. But through those lessons, I had discovered something far greater. My own strength, my own clarity, and my own voice. And those were things no one could ever take away. By this point, I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt not with the same person who betrayed you, but with yourself and those who truly cared. I had learned to give myself permission to feel, permission to heal, permission to grow. And with that realization came a profound sense of peace. Not the kind of fleeting peace that comes when life is easy. Not the kind that hides pain beneath smiles. But the quiet, enduring peace that comes when you've faced the truth, embraced your own strength, and allowed yourself to move forward. I began looking toward the future with gentle hope. I didn't need to plan everything. I didn't need to rush into trusting anyone new. I didn't need to erase the past. I only needed to continue walking forward slowly, steadily, and with my heart intact. And as I took those steps, I realized something beautiful. Even when the people we trust most show us who they truly are, even when betrayal stings deeply, we can find a way back to ourselves. We can heal. We can forgive. We can love not recklessly, not blindly, but wisely, with the clarity that comes from experience. That clarity became my compass. It guided me toward a life where my heart could remain open, where my spirit could remain gentle, and where my trust first in myself could flourish again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully, deeply, undeniably free. Sitting by the window that evening, I let the fading sunlight wash over me. The day had been quiet, ordinary in every way, yet it felt extraordinary. Because it marked another step in my journey, a journey from hurt to healing, from doubt to understanding, from fear to hope. I thought about him, the one I had trusted more than anyone. I thought about the lies, the small betrayals, and the moments that had shaken me to my core. And for the first time, I felt a sense of closure, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that makes peace with it. I realized something profound. Life is not about avoiding pain. It's about learning to navigate it. It's about discovering the strength inside you to face the truth, accept reality, and continue forward even when your heart is bruised. I thought about trust. How fragile it can be. How easily it can be broken. And yet, how necessary it is. Not just trust in others, but trust in yourself. Because the moment you learn to believe in your own instincts, in your own worth, in your ability to protect your heart, you begin to reclaim control over your life. I thought about forgiveness. Not the easy kind, not the words we say to make someone else feel better, but the quiet, deliberate forgiveness that comes from understanding. Forgiveness for him. Yes, but mostly forgiveness for myself. For the moments I doubted, for the moments I hurt, for the times I questioned my own judgment. Because carrying anger and regret only weighs you down. Letting go gently, slowly, consciously allows you to breathe again. I looked around my home, and for the first time, it felt fully mine again. Not just the walls, the furniture, the familiar rooms, but the sense of safety, the warmth of family, the feeling that I belonged here. My parents had been my anchor through all of it, patiently letting me heal on my own terms, showing me that love doesn't demand perfection, only presence. I thought about the future. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel terrifying. It didn't feel fragile. It felt open. Full of possibilities. Not every day would be perfect. Some days would be heavy, some moments would sting. But I knew now that I could handle it. I had survived betrayal. I had faced my fears. I had spoken my truth. I had reclaimed my heart. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, I am enough. I am safe. I can trust myself again. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It wasn't a shouted mantra. It was a calm, steady acknowledgement, a soft truth that settled deep inside me and refused to leave. I thought about the lessons this experience had given me. That people can disappoint us, but their actions do not define our worth. That honesty, even when painful, creates the space for healing. That vulnerability is not weakness. It is courage. That love and trust are gifts we can give wisely, not recklessly. And that sometimes, losing someone is the only way to find yourself. The evening deepened, and the first stars appeared in the sky. I watched them, small points of light shining steadily in the vast darkness. And I realized something simple but profound. Even after the darkest nights, the light can return. Even after the deepest hurt, hope can return. Even after betrayal, love in its truest, gentlest form can return. I smiled softly. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past no longer hurt, but because I had learned something far more important. Life goes on. And so do I. With every step I take, I carry both the pain and the lessons. I carry the scars and the growth. And I carry the quiet, unwavering belief that I am capable of healing, of trusting, of living fully again. The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer controls me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free to move forward with calm, gentle confidence. The stars twinkled above, and I whispered one final thought into the quiet night. I trusted him. I was hurt. I survived. And I am whole again. And in that truth, I found a deep, abiding peace. A peace that does not erase the past, but lights the way for the future.